It's dawn high in the Andes, roughly 1463 CE, and you are running. Not jogging, running. You are somewhere above 3,000 meters, where the air holds about a third less oxygen than it does at sea level, and your lungs already know it, because you grew up at this altitude and your body has been quietly compensating for it your entire life. More red blood cells, a bigger lung capacity, a heart that's used to working harder for the same amount of air. The trail in front of you is stone, cut directly into a mountainside, barely wide enough for two people to pass, with a drop on one side that would end the conversation permanently. You are carrying a small bag. Inside it, the set of knotted cords, and a message memorized word for word, because the cords alone won't tell the next runner everything he needs to know. You've been running for about 1.5 miles, maybe 2, and your lungs are burning in that specific way that only high-altitude running produces, a burn that has nothing to do with fitness and everything to do with the air itself simply not having enough oxygen in it. And in a few minutes, you will hand this off to another young man standing at a small stone hut ahead, who has been waiting there specifically for you, alert, ready, and he will take off running before you've even fully caught your breath. You are a chasqui. You are one relay leg in a communication network that, on a good day, can move a message from Quito to Cusco, roughly 2,000 kilometers of some of the worst terrain on Earth, in under a week. A mounted courier in contemporary Europe on a good road with a fresh horse could not touch that speed over that kind of ground, and Europe's roads were flat by comparison. The Inca did it with 2 legs, no horses, no wheels, and a writing system historians spent 5 centuries insisting wasn't a writing system at all. So today we're asking the obvious, embarrassing question. How does an empire the size of the Roman Empire, stretching from modern Colombia to Chile, across the most vertical, broken, mountainous terrain on the continent, run a functioning long-distance communication system with none of the tools everyone assumes you need? No wheel, no horse, no alphabet in the way we usually mean it. Let's go.
The thing nobody tells you about the Inca. Here's the assumption baked into the question. We hear no wheels, no horses, and we picture a civilization that simply hadn't gotten there yet, behind on some imaginary tech tree, still waiting to invent the cart. That's wrong, and it's wrong in a way that says more about us than about them. The Inca knew what a wheel was. Archaeologists have found wheeled toys in the Andes, small ceramic animals mounted on axles, proof the concept wasn't some undiscovered mystery waiting to be stumbled into. They didn't build wheeled transport because in that terrain, a wheel is a liability, not a solution. You cannot roll a cart up a stone staircase cut into a cliff face. You cannot roll a cart across a rope suspension bridge swaying over a gorge. And there was no horse to pull it anyway, because there were no large domesticated draft animals in South America until the Spanish brought them across an ocean. The Inca had llamas, which carry maybe 25 to 30 kilograms and simply lie down and refuse to move if you push past that limit, and that is genuinely the ceiling of Andean animal transport. Llamas are stubborn in a way that has apparently not changed in 500 years. So the Inca didn't fail to invent the wheel. They looked at their terrain, correctly assessed that a wheel was useless on it, and built something better suited to vertical rock, a road system designed for feet, and a relay network designed around the one thing that terrain couldn't defeat, a trained, fast, well-supported human being. That's not a civilization behind schedule. That's a civilization solving the actual problem in front of them, instead of the one Europe happened to solve.
Move 1. The road is the machine. Before you can understand the message system, you need to understand the road, because the road is what makes everything else possible. It's called the Qhapaq Ñan, the Royal Road, and it is one of the most underrated engineering achievements in human history. A network so extensive that in 2014, UNESCO recognized surviving sections of it as a World Heritage Site, spanning 6 modern countries. Estimates put the full network at somewhere between 30 and 40,000 kilometers of road, running the length and breadth of the empire, through coastal desert, through cloud forest, and through mountain passes above 4,000 meters, where the air is thin enough to make breathing itself a project. This wasn't one road, it was a system, a main highland spine running roughly north to south along the spine of the Andes, a parallel coastal route running through some of the driest desert on the planet, and thousands of kilometers of connecting spurs linking the two and reaching down into fertile valleys and up to remote mountain settlements that a European road builder would have written off as unreachable.
and the engineering adapts to whatever the land throws at it. On steep slopes, the road becomes stone staircases, sometimes thousands of steps carved directly into rock, engineered with a rise and run that could keep a trained runner moving at speed without breaking stride. Across ravines and rivers, the Inca built suspension bridges out of woven grass rope, genuinely woven, genuinely rope, spun from ichu grass by entire communities, some spanning over 45 meters across gorges that would otherwise take days to route around. These bridges were rebuilt annually, a rotating labor obligation owed by the local villages closest to each crossing, because organic fiber doesn't last forever in a wet mountain climate, and a bridge that fails mid-crossing is not a maintenance issue you can defer. The Spanish, when they first encountered these bridges in the 1530s, described them with something close to disbelief in their own written accounts. Several noted that their horses had to be blindfolded to be led across, because the animals could see straight down through the woven rope to the river far below and would simply refuse to move. And through the desert coast, where sun rather than altitude is the enemy, the road is lined and marked with low stone walls so travelers don't lose the path in genuinely featureless terrain, where a wrong turn in the wrong direction can be fatal within a day. This is a road built by a civilization with no iron tools, no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals capable of hauling stone in bulk, using coordinated human labor organized through a rotational service obligation called the mita, where communities owed the state a set number of labor days a year instead of paying in coin or crop. The road wasn't a side project or an afterthought. It was infrastructure on the scale of the Roman road network, arguably more difficult to build given the terrain, and it existed for one primary purpose: to move people, goods, armies, and information faster than the empire could otherwise hold itself together across a landscape that actively fights against being held together at all.
Move 2, the relay, and the number I told you to hold on to. Now here's the part that should genuinely stop you. Along the Royal Road, at intervals of roughly every 2 to 3 kilometers, the Inca built small stone huts called chasqui houses. Each one was staffed in rotating shifts by trained young men, the chasquis, selected from local communities as part of their mita service. Their entire job for the duration of their shift was to wait, alert, ready to run, listening for a signal from the previous relay point. When a chasqui arrived carrying a message, the waiting runner at the next post didn't get a rest, didn't ask for details, didn't hesitate. He got the handoff and immediately took off at speed, covering his stretch of 2 to 3 kilometers at what chroniclers describe as close to full sprint, because the distance was short enough that pure speed mattered more than pacing yourself for endurance. Multiply that by hundreds of relay points strung across thousands of kilometers of mountain road, running continuously, day and night, in every kind of weather the Andes can produce, and you get a message delivery network with almost no downtime built in. Spanish chroniclers, writing within decades of the conquest and drawing on accounts from people who had lived under the system, recorded that fresh fish from the Pacific coast could be delivered to the Inca ruler in Cusco, hundreds of kilometers inland and thousands of meters up in elevation, while it was still fresh enough to eat. Think about the cold chain problem that solves without a single piece of refrigeration technology, purely through relay speed. And the headline number, the one I told you to hold on to? Multiple colonial-era accounts describe messages covering roughly 2,000 kilometers from Quito to Cusco in somewhere around 5 days. Contemporary Spanish writers, moving the same general route on horseback along roads that weren't built with horses in mind, took noticeably longer to cover comparable distances. A network of runners on foot in some of the harshest terrain on the planet was outpacing mounted messengers in early modern Europe's fastest postal systems. That's the number. Hold on to it, because it's not a fun fact. It's the entire thesis of this video in one statistic.
Move 3. What were they actually carrying? Here's where it gets genuinely strange, because the message itself wasn't written the way you or I would write it. The primary recorded information technology of the Inca Empire was the quipu, sometimes spelled quipu, a device made of a main horizontal cord with dozens or even hundreds of pendant cords hanging off it, each one tied with a sequence of knots at different positions, using different knot types, different cord colors, different spacing, and sometimes cords spun and plied in different directions. For a long time, European scholars looked at this and concluded the Inca simply had no writing system, full stop, an oral empire that happened to also use an elaborate abacus. That conclusion turns out to be badly incomplete, and it says more about who was doing the looking than about what quipu actually are. We know for certain that quipu encoded numerical data, and encoded it well.
The knot positions follow what is functionally a base 10 positional system, units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tied at specific heights along the cord, essentially a physical spreadsheet you can read by touch and by sight. Colonial administrators who took over Inca census and tax systems after the conquest continued to rely on surviving quipu readers, called Qhapaq Ñan, for years after the conquest, because the existing quipu records were more accurate and more current than anything the Spanish had brought with them across the ocean. That's not a footnote. That's an occupying government relying on the conquered civilization's own record-keeping because it demonstrably worked better than the alternative.
But the harder, more contested question is whether quipu went further than numbers, whether some of them encoded narrative information, names or events, in a way closer to what we'd call actual writing. A small number of surviving quipu, particularly a set of narrative cords linked to a local community's own historical record-keeping tradition, show structural patterns that some researchers argue represent non-numerical, potentially phonetic or logographic information, layered into the color, the twist direction, and the knot sequencing. This is genuinely unresolved. Nobody has cracked it the way Champollion cracked hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone. Fewer than 1,000 quipu survive today, most of them looted or burned in the decades after conquest, specifically because Spanish colonial administrators recognized quipu as a rival information system, a form of literacy they could not read and therefore could not control, and in several documented campaigns ordered them destroyed as objects of idolatry. We are trying to decode a writing system after burning most of the library it was written in. And for long-distance relay messages specifically, the surviving evidence suggests quipu often traveled alongside an oral component. The chasqui didn't just hand over a cord and walk away. He recited the message that the cord was keyed to, because the cord encoded the structure and the numbers precisely, while the runner's trained memory carried the surrounding context, the names, the specifics that gave the numbers meaning. It's a hybrid system. Physical, durable, numerically precise cord as the backbone, human memory as the flexible payload riding alongside it. That combination, not either half alone, is what actually moved usable information across the empire at speed. Move 4. Who were the runners and what did it cost them? The chasquis themselves were specifically selected, typically starting young, chosen in part for physical stamina and reportedly trained from adolescence in running at altitude, since sprinting competitively at 3,500 meters isn't a skill you can pick up casually as an adult with no preparation. They lived in rotating shifts near their post, supported by local communities as part of the same Mita labor obligation system that maintained the roads and rebuilt the bridges. This wasn't volunteer heroism or individual glory-seeking. It was state-organized infrastructure staffed by conscripted rotating labor, the same way the road itself was built and maintained by ordinary people fulfilling a service obligation to the state. The job was genuinely dangerous. Running mountain trails at speed, at altitude, in the dark, in driving rain, across rope bridges slick with moisture, carried a real and constant risk of injury or death. And chroniclers describe chasquis using a conch shell horn, called a pututu, blown ahead of arrival to warn the next relay runner to be ready and to clear the trail of any obstruction. An early warning system layered directly onto the physical relay itself, so that no second was wasted at the handoff point. And this wasn't just messages. The chasqui network doubled as the delivery mechanism for small, high-value goods, that fresh fish being the famous example, but also delicate textiles and other perishables intended for the Sapa Inca himself, meaning the same infrastructure that moved state information also moved a functioning long-distance perishable supply chain, powered entirely by trained human runners and a chain of stone huts spaced roughly 2 kilometers apart across an empire the length of the western half of South America. Move 5. Why the state needed this so badly. Step back and ask why any of this existed, why an empire would pour this much organized labor into runners and rope bridges instead of, say, more temples. The Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, was enormous and brutally vertical, spanning coastline, desert, cloud forest, and high alpine terrain, often within the same single day's travel between them. Holding that together required the state to know things fast. Army movements on a contested frontier, a grain surplus in one province sitting against a grain shortage in another just days away, a local uprising that needed a response before it spread, a death in the royal line requiring an immediate and carefully managed succession. A famine in one valley could be answered with a grain shipment pulled from another valley storehouse days away, but only if the request and the response could both travel faster than the crisis itself was unfolding. The relay network, paired with an empire-wide storage system of tambo waystations stocked with food, textiles, weapons, and supplies along the road at regular intervals, meant the Inca state could respond to a problem on one edge of the empire with resources and instructions issued from the center, on a timescale that for its era and its terrain was genuinely exceptional and arguably unmatched anywhere else in the pre-industrial world. This is the same underlying logic behind the Egyptian granary system, behind Roman roads, behind every empire that ever managed to last more than a single generation. An empire that cannot move information faster than its own problems will eventually come apart at the seams, one unanswered crisis at a time. The Inca solved that problem with knotted cords and trained legs, on terrain that would break a horse, and had in fact never seen one.
The twist. Here's where this whole story turns over. We've spent this entire video treating the Inca communication system as an impressive workaround. Clever, sure, admirable given the circumstances, but ultimately a substitute for real writing, a stand-in for what Europe or China or the Middle East already had and the Andes supposedly lacked. Flip it. The quipu and relay system wasn't Tawantinsuyu apologizing for not having an alphabet. It was a fully functioning empire-scale administrative technology that outperformed its European counterparts on pure speed, and that we are only now, 5 centuries later, beginning to admit we may have fundamentally misread from the start. For nearly 500 years after the conquest, the dominant scholarly position was some version of the Inca had no writing. That conclusion wasn't primarily built from evidence, and it certainly wasn't built by anyone who had tried and failed to read a quipu properly. It was built from the assumption that writing has to look like an alphabet, or at minimum a set of pictographs on a durable flat surface, and that anything else simply doesn't count as literacy. A knotted cord looked to 16th century European eyes like bookkeeping at best and superstition at worst, and so most of it was burned, and the specific people trained to read it were, within a couple of generations, killed, converted, or scattered, taking the working knowledge of the system with them. We didn't fail to find the key to quipu because the system was too primitive to hold real information. We're struggling today because the people who held that key were removed from the picture, and the physical archive was deliberately, systematically destroyed by people who correctly recognized it as a rival system of power and chose to eliminate it rather than study it. That's not a story about a civilization that lacked writing. That's a story about a writing system that got erased before it could be properly read by anyone outside the culture that built it, and about a communication network, physical roads, relay stations, trained runners, encoded cords, oral memory working in tandem, that was for its terrain and its era faster and arguably more resilient than the postal systems belonging to the empire that ultimately destroyed it.
Here's what I keep coming back to. Somewhere on a mountain trail above 3,500 meters, a young man is running full speed with a knotted cord in a bag and a sentence memorized word for word, because in a few minutes he's going to hand both of those things to a stranger he's never met and trust that stranger to carry them onward faster than he could carry them himself. No wheel under him, no horse waiting, no margin for a twisted ankle on a stone staircase slick with rain. And that handoff, repeated across hundreds of relay stations and thousands of kilometers of some of the least forgiving ground on the planet, moved information across one of the largest empires in the pre-industrial world, faster than mounted riders could move it across the comparatively gentle roads of Spain. We call that a workaround. It wasn't a workaround. It was the correct answer to the actual terrain in front of them, arrived at through generations of road building, relay logistics, and a knot-based information system we are still, right now, in university archives and museum storerooms, trying to fully read. You will send a message today in under a second to the other side of the planet, without thinking about it once, without any awareness of the infrastructure making that possible. Somewhere in the Andes, 500 years ago, that same basic act, get this information from here to there, accurately and fast, was a physical relationship between two runners, a road cut directly into a cliff face, and a length of knotted cord passed hand to hand in the dark. And on the days that mattered most, when a message genuinely needed to outrun a crisis, it worked. So here's the question. If every satellite and server on Earth went dark tomorrow, and the fastest thing left to carry a message was a trained person on foot, how far do you think it could actually travel in a week? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.